Today, we're looking at the Real ID enforcement for domestic air travel. It officially began on May 7th, 2025.
That's right. We'll cover what Real ID actually is, who needs one to fly domestically now.
And what happens if you arrive at the airport without one, plus those alternative IDs the TSA accepts.
We'll also touch on how different states are handling it. Think New Jersey's low numbers or efforts in California and Illinois.
And if you find this analysis useful, we'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe.
Okay, so Real ID. It stems from the Real ID Act of 2005, which itself came out of the 9/11 Commission recommendations.
Right, setting minimum security standards for state-issued IDs.
Exactly. And now, May 7th, 2025, is when federal agencies, including the TSA for air travel, started enforcing those standards.
And you can tell a compliant ID by the star marking.
Usually, yes. A star, typically up in the corner. Some states also have enhanced driver's licenses or EDLs.
Ah, yes, they function similarly.
They do. They're marked differently, though often with a U.S. flag or just the word enhanced. They also work for Real ID purposes at the airport.
So let's clarify exactly who needs one of these for flying within the U.S.
Okay. It applies to travelers aged 18 and over. If you're flying domestically and you don't have another TSA-approved ID, you'll need to show a Real ID or an EDL.
And if you don't have any of those options, what other IDs work?
Well, things like a valid U.S. passport, that's probably the most common alternative. Also a passport card, a permanent resident card, military IDs.
So there are quite a few alternatives.
Yes, several. Without one of those, or a Real ID, you should definitely plan for extra screening at security.
Good point. And what about travelers under 18?
Currently, they don't need to show identification when flying domestically with a companion.
Okay. Now, the scenario everyone worries about. Arriving at an airport without a Real ID or an acceptable alternative now that enforcement has started. Are they denied boarding?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
The TSA has stated that presenting a non-compliant license doesn't automatically mean you can't fly.
But there's always a but.
But yes, expect extra steps. You'll likely face additional identity verification processes.
Which could mean
It might involve being sent to a separate screening area, answering more detailed questions from TSA officers, potentially even a physical pat-down.
so the advice is definitely to arrive early.
Absolutely. The TSA recommends arriving at least 3 hours before your flight, especially if you know you don't have compliant ID, just to allow for those potential delays.
You mentioned several alternative IDs earlier, passports, military IDs. Could you elaborate a bit more on the full list? What else does the TSA accept?
Certainly. The TSA keeps an official list, and it's quite comprehensive. Besides passports and military IDs, it includes things like DHS Trusted Traveler Cards.
Like Global Entry, NextSS.
Exactly. Global Entry, Nexus, Sentry, Fast Cards. Also, a border crossing card, federally recognized tribal nation photo IDs, even an HSPD-12 PIV card.
Okay, quite specific federal credentials there.
Yes. And foreign government-issued passports, certain Canadian IDs like provincial driver's licenses, or the Indian and Northern Affairs Canada card.
What about work-related ID?
There's the Transportation Worker Identification Credential, TWIC, and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Employment Authorization Card, the I-766.
And veterans.
A Veteran Health Identification Card, VHIC, is also acceptable.
It's quite a range. What about expired IDs?
Generally, they need to be current. The TSA might accept some expired IDs, like a DOD ID if it expired less than 2 years ago, but it's really best practice to travel with unexpired identification. Relying on an expired one could cause issues.
Makes sense. Let's shift to the states. We heard adoption hasn't been uniform. New Jersey, for instance, reportedly had a lower rate. Why is that?
Yes, reports indicated New Jersey's compliance rate was among the lowest, somewhere around 17% relatively recently. There could be a few reasons.
Such as?
Well, for a while, they used an appointment-only system at the Motor Vehicle Commission, which might have created backlogs, but perhaps more significantly.
The passport factor.
Exactly. A very large percentage of New Jersey residents, maybe close to 80%, already have valid U.S. passports. So for domestic travel, they might not feel the immediate need for a Real ID.
Even so, the state's MVC has been trying to boost numbers.
Oh, yes. They've reportedly added more appointment slots and even offered emergency appointments for people with urgent travel needs tied to critical situations.
Interesting. What about larger states like California and Illinois? How did they cope with the rush before the deadline?
They definitely saw a surge in demand, like many states. California's DMV, for example, responded by extending their office hours and offering appointments on Saturdays.
Trying to increase capacity.
Right. And Illinois facing similar high demand, actually set up what they called a Real ID Supercenter in Chicago, specifically to handle application processing more efficiently.
A dedicated center. Okay.
Yes. And officials in Illinois have also been clear that while Real ID is recommended for flying or accessing federal sites, they'll continue issuing them post-deadline. It's not a hard stop on issuance.
And they helped residents figure out if they even needed one.
Correct. Illinois provided online tools to help people check if a Real ID was truly necessary for them, especially, again, if they already had a passport or another acceptable ID.
So, to recap the key points we've discussed, Real ID enforcement for domestic flights is now active, stemming from post 9/11 security recommendations.
Yes, and look for that star marking on state IDs or the flag on enhanced driver's licenses. If you don't have one, you can likely still fly, but expect extra screening and potential delays.
And importantly, remember that passports and that whole list of other IDs we went through are still perfectly fine for TSA checkpoints.
Absolutely. The varying compliance rates, like we saw with New Jersey, really highlight the challenge of rolling out a national standard like this.
That high passport ownership in New Jersey is a compelling explanation for their specific situation, despite the MVC's efforts.
It certainly seems plausible. It makes you think about the bigger picture of standardized ID, security, and travel convenience.
Where do we go from here? What might identity verification look like in the future?
That's the interesting question. Will new forms of ID emerge? How much will technology, perhaps biometrics or digital IDs, play a role in streamlining things?
It's that constant balance, isn't it? Security measures versus the ease and speed of travel. Real ID is just the latest step in that evolving dynamic.
Precisely. It's a balance that will likely keep shifting.
Well, thank you for joining us for this analysis today. If you found this information helpful, please do like and subscribe for more explorations of important topics.